I never expected the man who rented me a room to become the person who made me question everything I believed about love. But the first time I saw him standing in that quiet house, I knew there was a story hidden behind his silence. My name is Ethan Parker, and at 26 years old, I thought I understood what starting over meant. After leaving the crowded streets of the city behind, I was searching for something simple. A small place to live, a peaceful corner where I could rebuild my career as a freelance graphic designer, and a chance to breathe without constantly feeling like I was falling behind. That was how I found the old house at the edge of Havenwood, a charming town surrounded by forests, small businesses, and quiet streets where everyone seemed to know each other. The rental listing was short and almost too simple. Private room available. Reasonable price. Quiet home. When I arrived, I understood why. The house was beautiful, but it felt untouched, like someone had carefully maintained it without truly living in it. The wooden floors were polished. The garden was perfectly arranged, and every room looked like it belonged in a magazine. Yet there was something missing. There was no warmth, no photographs on the walls, no signs of laughter. It was a home that looked complete but somehow felt empty. Then I met Nathan Caldwell. He was 42, an accomplished architect, and the owner of the house. The first thing I noticed was his calm presence. He was the kind of person who did not need to raise his voice to be noticed. His simple clothes, serious expression, and quiet confidence made it clear that he was someone used to carrying responsibility. But what caught my attention was not his success. It was the sadness behind his eyes. "You can take the room if you still want it," he said, his voice steady. "I should warn you, I am not very good at conversation." I smiled and told him that was fine. I was not looking for a best friend. I was looking for a place to stay. At least that was what I believed at the time. Moving into Nathan's house was different from what I expected. He was polite but distant. He respected my privacy and rarely asked personal questions. Most mornings, I would see him drinking coffee alone by the window before leaving for work. Most evenings, I would hear the quiet sound of him walking through the empty rooms after returning home. It felt like he was surrounded by everything he needed, yet somehow still searching for something he had lost. The strange part was that Nathan kept looking at me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but as if he was trying to understand something he could not explain. Sometimes I would catch him watching me while I worked on my designs at the kitchen table. Sometimes he would pause when he heard me laughing during a phone call with a friend. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. Maybe he saw someone younger with a different kind of energy. Maybe he saw a version of life he thought he had left behind. I did not know the answer yet, but I knew one thing. The quiet house I had entered as a stranger was hiding a story, and somehow, I had become part of it. Living with Nathan Caldwell taught me something I never expected. Sometimes the quietest people are carrying the loudest stories inside them. During my first week in the house, I thought I would spend most of my time keeping to myself. I imagined a simple arrangement where I paid rent, worked on my designs, and eventually moved on when I was ready. But life inside Nathan's home slowly became something different. The house that once felt cold began to feel a little less empty. Not because the rooms changed, but because small moments started filling the silence. Every morning, I would make coffee before sitting down at the kitchen table with my laptop. At first, Nathan would simply walk past, offer a polite greeting, and leave for work. But after a few days, he started stopping for a few minutes. He asked about my projects, my ideas, and the drawings scattered across my desk. For someone who claimed he was not good at conversation, he seemed surprisingly interested. I learned that Nathan was not unfriendly. He was just careful. Every word seemed chosen before he spoke, every emotion carefully kept behind a wall. One afternoon, a heavy rainstorm came through Havenwood, and I found myself unable to leave for a scheduled meeting. The roads outside were covered with water, and the quiet neighborhood became even more peaceful than usual. Nathan came home earlier than expected and found me sitting near the window, organizing my unfinished designs. Instead of walking straight to his office like usual, he sat across from me and asked what I was creating. I explained that I designed artwork for small businesses, helping them create a stronger identity. He listened carefully, and for the first time I saw a different side of him. He was not the distant architect everyone in town respected. He was simply a man who appreciated creativity. He told me that buildings were not just about walls and materials. They were about the lives people created inside them. That sentence stayed with me because I realized Nathan understood more about homes than he allowed people to see. Over the next few weeks, we developed a comfortable routine. I watered the plants in the kitchen because Nathan always forgot. He fixed small things around the house because I kept noticing problems before they became serious. We began sharing simple meals when our schedules allowed it. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no grand declarations or sudden changes. It was just two people slowly becoming familiar with each other. But I started noticing things about Nathan that others probably missed. He always checked that the porch light was on when I returned late. He remembered small details from conversations we had weeks earlier. He kept a respectful distance, yet somehow made it clear that he cared. One evening, I found him standing in the hallway, looking at an old framed photograph that had been hidden on a bookshelf. When he noticed me, he quickly placed it back and changed the subject. I did not ask questions, but I understood there was a part of his past he was not ready to share. That was when I realized something important. Nathan was not empty. He was protecting a place in his heart that had once been hurt. And the more I learned about him, the more I wondered what kind of story had created the man who lived behind those quiet walls. The first time Nathan Caldwell talked about his past, I realized the silence around him was not because he had nothing to say. It was because he had spent years believing there was no one who wanted to listen. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon when the town of Havenwood seemed slower than usual. The bakery across the street was closing early, the streets were nearly empty, and the warm sunlight filled the living room where Nathan and I sat with 2 cups of coffee between us. Until that moment, our conversations had always stayed on safe topics. Work, weather, daily routines. Things that did not require us to reveal too much. But that afternoon felt different. Nathan looked at the old photograph he had hidden away weeks earlier, and for the first time he did not immediately change the subject. He told me about his marriage. He explained that years ago, he believed providing a comfortable life and building a successful career were enough to create happiness. He had focused so much on responsibilities that he forgot how important it was to simply be present. Eventually, the relationship ended, and after the divorce, Nathan convinced himself that living alone was easier. He told himself that fewer connections meant fewer chances to disappoint someone. Listening to him, I understood something I had not expected. The man everyone in Havenwood respected was not someone who lacked emotions. He was someone who had been carrying regret for a very long time. I did not try to give him advice. I did not tell him what he should have done differently. Instead, I simply told him that making mistakes did not mean someone was incapable of changing. Nathan looked surprised by my answer, almost as if he was not used to people seeing him as a person instead of a successful architect. After that conversation, something between us shifted. Not suddenly and not dramatically. It was more like a door that had been slightly closed finally opened a little wider. Nathan started sharing more small details about his life. He showed me the designs he was working on and explained why certain buildings mattered to him. I learned that his passion was never really about creating impressive structures. It was about creating places where people could feel safe and connected. In return, I told him about my own journey. I explained how difficult it had been to leave the city, rebuild my confidence, and start my career again from nothing. I admitted that I often worried I was not successful enough compared to everyone around me. Nathan listened carefully and said something I never forgot. He told me that success was not measured by how many people knew your name. It was measured by whether your life had meaning when the day ended. For the first time since moving into the house, I saw Nathan smile without hesitation. It was a small moment, but it felt important. The man who had seemed distant and unreachable was slowly becoming someone I could understand. I also realized something about myself. I had moved into Nathan's house looking for a temporary place to stay, but somehow I had found a place where I felt seen. I did not know where this connection would lead, and I was careful not to imagine too much. But I knew one thing. The quiet house at the edge of Havenwood was no longer just a place where two strangers lived under the same roof. It was becoming a place where two people were learning how to open their hearts again. The weeks that followed changed the way I saw Nathan Caldwell. Before, I had only noticed the quiet man who lived behind careful routines and polite distance. Now, I started noticing the small moments that revealed who he truly was. Nathan was still reserved, still someone who preferred listening over speaking, but there was a warmth beneath that calm exterior that appeared more often than before. It happened in simple ways. He would leave a note on the kitchen counter reminding me that a package had arrived. He would ask about my latest design project and actually remember the details days later. He would stop by the garden in the evening and listen while I talked about random ideas that came to my mind. None of these things seemed extraordinary, but together they showed me that Nathan was making an effort. One afternoon, I was struggling with a new design assignment for a local coffee shop. I had been staring at my computer screen for hours, unable to find the right inspiration. Nathan walked by, noticed my frustration, and asked if I wanted his opinion. I almost laughed because he was an architect, not a graphic designer, but I agreed. Instead of focusing on colors or shapes, he asked me a simple question. He asked what feeling I wanted people to have when they entered the coffee shop. That question changed the way I looked at my work. Nathan did not just see buildings as structures. He saw spaces as experiences. That was when I understood why people respected him so much. His talent came from understanding how places affected people. Later that evening, we sat together in the kitchen talking about creativity, dreams, and the choices that brought us to where we were. Nathan admitted that after his divorce, he stopped allowing himself to imagine a different future. He believed that some parts of life were simply over. I told him that sometimes people close doors because they are afraid of what might happen if they open them again. He looked at me for a long moment and smiled softly. He said maybe I was right. After that day, the atmosphere in the house changed. The rooms that once felt silent began carrying new memories. We cooked dinner together more often. We watched movies on weekends when neither of us wanted to go anywhere. Sometimes we would sit on the porch and talk until the evening air became cool. I started feeling comfortable around Nathan in a way I had not expected. At the same time, I noticed that he still watched me sometimes with that same curious expression from the first day I arrived. But now I understood it differently. It was not just curiosity. It was as if Nathan was trying to understand how someone so different from him had brought life back into a house he had accepted as empty. Still, I knew there were boundaries we had not crossed. Nathan was my landlord, and I was his tenant. The difference in our ages, our experiences, and our pasts was something we both understood. That reality kept me careful. But feelings were not always created through dramatic moments. Sometimes they appeared quietly through shared mornings, honest conversations, and the comfort of knowing someone was there. I did not know what the future would bring, but for the first time since moving to Havenwood, I was no longer thinking about when I would leave. I was starting to wonder what it would feel like to stay. The moment I realized Nathan Caldwell was becoming important to me was also the moment I started reminding myself that he was someone I should keep a careful distance from. It was easier when he was only my landlord. It was easier when he was the quiet man who lived behind closed doors and followed a predictable routine. But somewhere between shared dinners, late evening conversations, and comfortable silence, Nathan had become someone I looked forward to seeing every day. That realization made me nervous because I knew feelings could change everything. I had moved into his house looking for stability, not a new relationship. I had spent so much time rebuilding my life that I was afraid of anything that could make me feel uncertain again. Nathan seemed to understand that without me saying a word. He never crossed boundaries. He never pressured me. Instead, he continued showing his care through small actions that slowly became impossible to ignore. One morning, I woke up to find a cup of coffee waiting for me on the kitchen counter. It was prepared exactly how I liked it, even though I only mentioned my preference once weeks earlier. Next to it was a simple note reminding me to take a break from working too long. It was such a small gesture, but it stayed in my mind throughout the day. Nathan was not someone who expressed emotions easily, but he paid attention. He remembered. He cared. Around the same time, I noticed changes in myself too. I started feeling comfortable enough to share more of my life with him. I told him about my dreams, my fears, and the moments when I wondered if I had made the right choices after leaving the city. Nathan never tried to fix everything for me. He simply listened. That was something I had not experienced often. Many people wanted to offer solutions, but Nathan gave me something different. He gave me the feeling that my thoughts mattered. However, the closer we became, the more I noticed the distance Nathan sometimes created. There were moments when we would have a meaningful conversation, and then the next day he would become quiet again. It felt like he was reminding himself not to get too close. One evening, I finally asked if everything was okay. Nathan looked toward the window for a long moment before answering. He admitted that he was afraid of making the same mistakes again. He said his past relationship taught him that good intentions were not always enough, and he did not want to bring confusion into my life. Hearing that surprised me because I had never seen Nathan as someone who doubted himself. But beneath the confidence of the successful architect was someone who was afraid of hurting another person. I told him that everyone deserved the chance to grow beyond their past. He listened quietly, but I could tell he was still struggling with that idea. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I received an email offering me a design opportunity in another city. It was exactly the kind of career opportunity one had hoped for when I left my old life behind. It should have made me excited. Instead, my first thought was about the house in Havenwood and the person waiting there. That was when I understood how much things had changed. I had come to Nathan's home believing it was only a temporary stop. But now, leaving felt much more complicated than I ever imagined. And for the first time, I had to ask myself a question I was not prepared to answer. Was I staying because this place had become my home, or because Nathan had become part of it? The opportunity in another city should have been the answer I was waiting for. It was the kind of chance I had dreamed about when I first left everything behind. A bigger market, more clients, and the possibility of building the career I always wanted. Yet when I looked at the email on my screen, I did not feel the excitement I expected. Instead, I felt a strange heaviness because my thoughts immediately went to Nathan Caldwell. That realization confused me more than anything else. I had always believed that moving forward meant leaving the past behind, but now I was standing between a future I worked hard to create and a place I never expected to call home. For several days, I kept the news to myself. I continued my normal routine, working at the kitchen table, sharing quiet breakfasts with Nathan, and pretending nothing had changed. But Nathan noticed. He always noticed the small details. He noticed when I was distracted, when I became quieter than usual, and when my usual excitement about my projects disappeared. One evening, while we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset over Havenwood, he finally asked if something was wrong. I hesitated because I knew the answer could change everything. When I told him about the opportunity, he smiled and congratulated me immediately. He said it was a great chance and that I should be proud of myself. His reaction was exactly what a supportive person should have, but somehow it hurt. I realized I had secretly hoped he would ask me to stay. Instead, Nathan gave me the freedom to choose, and that made the decision even harder. Over the next few days, I started seeing the house differently. Every corner held memories I never expected to create. The kitchen where we shared conversations after long days. The garden where Nathan taught me about the plants he cared for. The living room where we slowly became comfortable sitting together without needing to fill every silence. This place had started as a rental, but it had become something more meaningful. At the same time, I noticed Nathan becoming more distant. He was polite, but the warmth between us seemed quieter. One evening, I found him organizing some documents in his office. I asked if he was avoiding me. Nathan paused and admitted that he was trying to give me space because he believed my future should not depend on him. He said that if leaving Havenwood helped me achieve my dreams, he would never want to stand in the way. His words showed kindness, but they also revealed how afraid he was. Nathan was not pushing me away because he did not care. He was stepping back because he cared too much and believed he did not deserve to ask for more. I told him that he was not the reason I felt uncertain. He was the reason I finally understood what I valued. Career mattered. Dreams mattered. But so did having someone who made ordinary days feel meaningful. Nathan looked at me quietly, and for a moment, the walls he had built around himself seemed to disappear. He admitted that the thought of me leaving made the house feel empty again. It was the first time he openly acknowledged what I had slowly begun to understand. I was no longer just a tenant living in his spare room. I had become part of his life. And as we stood there beneath the evening sky, I realized the biggest decision was not about choosing between a place and a person. It was about understanding where I truly belonged. The days after that conversation felt different. Nothing around me had changed, yet everything seemed to carry a new meaning. The same wooden floors, the same quiet mornings, and the same view of Havenwood outside the window all felt warmer because I finally understood what Nathan Caldwell had been trying to say without words. He cared about me, but he was also afraid. He had spent years convincing himself that staying alone was safer than risking another disappointment. I knew that feeling because I had done something similar. I had built my own walls after leaving the city, telling myself that independence was the only way to protect my future. Maybe that was why we understood each other so easily. We were both people who had learned how to survive, but we were slowly discovering how to live again. I decided not to leave immediately. I contacted the company that offered me the design opportunity and asked if there was a way to work remotely while I considered my options. It was not an easy choice, but for the first time, I was making a decision based on what I truly wanted instead of what I thought I was supposed to do. Nathan did not celebrate my choice as if he had won something. Instead, he simply thanked me for trusting him enough to stay a little longer. That response showed me how much he had changed. The old Nathan might have assumed that success and security could solve every problem. The man standing in front of me now understood that people were not things to hold on to. They were people to respect. As the weeks passed, our relationship continued to grow naturally. We did not rush into anything. We continued learning about each other, discovering the small details that made us who we were. I learned that Nathan loved old jazz records and spent Sunday mornings organizing his collection. He learned that I always became nervous before presenting my designs and needed someone to remind me that my work was valuable. We supported each other in ways that felt simple but meaningful. One weekend, Nathan invited me to a small gathering with some of his friends. I expected to feel uncomfortable because his world seemed so different from mine. Many of them were successful professionals who had known Nathan for years. But when I arrived, I noticed something important. They did not treat me like someone temporary. They treated me like someone who mattered to him. Throughout the evening, I watched Nathan relax in a way I had rarely seen. He laughed more. He spoke more freely. It reminded me that the version of Nathan everyone knew was only one part of him. The person I knew was someone thoughtful, patient, and quietly kind. Later that night, while we walked back through the peaceful streets of Havenwood, Nathan told me that he never expected his life to change this way. He said he thought his story had already been written after his divorce. He believed the best parts of life were behind him. I told him that people were not finished stories. Sometimes they were just waiting for the right person or the right moment to begin a new chapter. Nathan smiled and said that meeting me was the moment he stopped feeling like he was only surviving. Hearing those words reminded me of how far we had both come. We had entered each other's lives by chance, connected by a simple rental agreement, but we had found something much more valuable. We had found understanding, comfort, and the possibility of a future neither of us planned for. The hardest part about building a new life was not finding happiness. It was learning to believe that happiness could actually stay. After everything that happened with Nathan Caldwell, I thought the biggest challenge would be admitting my feelings. I was wrong. The real challenge was accepting that someone like Nathan, someone who had spent years protecting himself from disappointment, was willing to choose a different future. Our relationship continued quietly, away from the expectations of others. We were not trying to prove anything. We were simply two people learning what it meant to let someone else become part of our everyday lives. But eventually, the outside world began noticing the changes. Nathan had always been known as the serious architect who kept his personal life private. His colleagues were surprised when they saw him smiling more often, leaving work earlier, and talking about the small moments that mattered outside of his career. Some people were curious about me. They wondered who I was and how I became someone important in Nathan's life. At first, those questions made me uncomfortable. I worried that people would only see the differences between us. They would see my age, my career, and my simple background compared to Nathan's success. I wondered if I truly belonged in his world. Nathan noticed my hesitation before I even explained it. One evening, while we were walking through Havenwood after dinner, he asked what was bothering me. I told him I was afraid that people would think I was only a temporary part of his life. Nathan stopped and looked at me seriously. He told me that for years, he had built a life based on what others expected from him. He had followed the image of success everyone admired, but inside he felt disconnected. He said that meeting me reminded him that a meaningful life was not created by impressing people. It was created by sharing moments with someone who made him feel understood. His words stayed with me because I realized Nathan was not asking me to fit into his world. He was creating a new world where both of us belonged. A few weeks later, Nathan invited me to an important event for his architecture firm. It was the first time he introduced me publicly as someone important in his life. I expected to feel nervous, but standing beside him, I felt something unexpected. I felt calm. Nathan did not hide the connection we had built. He spoke about the people who inspired him and the lessons he learned about creating spaces that felt like home. He did not mention success or achievements first. He talked about purpose. After the event, we drove back to Havenwood under the quiet evening sky. Nathan told me that years ago, he believed love was something that belonged to another version of himself. He thought that chapter of his life had already ended. But now he understood that people could begin again at any point. I told him that I felt the same way. I came to Havenwood searching for a room to rent, but I found something I never expected. I found a place where I felt accepted. I found someone who saw me for who I was, not for what I could offer. As we arrived back at the house, the place that once felt empty now felt completely different. The lights were warm, the rooms felt alive, and the silence no longer felt lonely, felt peaceful. I knew there would always be challenges ahead. Life was never perfect, and love did not erase every uncertainty. But we had already overcome the hardest part. We had allowed ourselves to hope again. Years passed, and when I looked back at the day I first arrived in Havenwood, I could hardly believe how much my life had changed. I came to Nathan Caldwell's house believing I was only searching for a temporary place to stay. I thought I needed a quiet room, a fresh start, and enough time to rebuild my career. I never imagined that the empty house at the edge of town would become the place where I found the one thing I had been missing for so long. I found a home, not just a building with four walls, but a place filled with memories, conversations, and someone who made ordinary moments feel important. Nathan changed too. The man I first met was careful with every emotion, always carrying the weight of his past and keeping everyone at a safe distance. But over time, he learned that opening his heart did not make him weak. It made his life more meaningful. He still worked hard as an architect, but success no longer defined him. He cared more about coming home, sharing dinner, and hearing about my latest design projects than attending endless business events. The house that once felt silent became a place where music played, where laughter filled the rooms, and where two people who once believed they were alone created something together. I continued building my career as a designer, and Nathan continued supporting me in ways that reminded me why I trusted him. He never tried to control my choices. He encouraged me to chase my goals and reminded me that love should give people more freedom, not less. One evening, several years after moving in, we sat on the porch watching the sunset over Havenwood. The same place where we once had difficult conversations now felt like a symbol of everything we had overcome. Nathan looked at the house and smiled. He told me that when he bought the property years ago, he thought it would only be a place where he lived alone. He never expected it to become the center of his happiest memories. I told him that I felt the same way. I arrived there thinking I was only renting a room, but I discovered a life I never planned for. We talked about the fears we both carried when we first met. Nathan was afraid of opening his heart after losing a relationship he once believed would last forever. I was afraid of depending on someone after learning how to stand on my own. But we both learned that love was not about forgetting the past. It was about finding someone who helped you believe in the future again. Looking back, I realized that the most important moments were not the dramatic ones. They were the small moments that happened every day. A morning coffee shared in silence. A conversation after a long day. A smile across the room that said more than words ever could. Those moments built everything. They transformed a house into a home and two strangers into family. Nathan once believed his story had already ended after his divorce. I once believed I was only passing through Havenwood. We were both wrong. Sometimes life takes us somewhere unexpected because that is where we are meant to find something greater than what we were searching for. And as I stood beside Nathan, looking at the home we built together, I knew the greatest chapters of our lives were not the ones we planned. They were the ones we never saw coming.